Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle and this is a reading roundup. In this reading roundup, I'm going to tell you about the books that I've been reading recently, but also I want to tell you about the books that I read for the Golden Girls Readathon, for Pastoral June, and for Kate Howe's Summer of Suspense. So I've been involved in a lot of readathons in the month of June, and I'm going to tell you about those books. But first, I want to tell you about a very English murder that I read. This is by Verity Bright. This is the first in the Lady Eleanor Swift series. I have read books 2, 3, and 4 in this series, but not the first one. I read the second book as a review copy for Book Sirens. I think it was Book Sirens or NetGalley, I can't remember. Anyway, and I really enjoyed it, so I bought the first one so that I could start at the beginning of the series. This is a historical mystery series set in 1920 in England, and Eleanor, or Ellie as she likes to be called, has to come back to England from South Africa. She is an orphan. She is in her late 20s, 28 I think, and her uncle dies and she is now heir to the home. I forget what it was called. Henley Hall. Her uncle was Lord Henley, and because her father and mother are dead, she inherits the home and the title, and so she has to go back after he passes away. And so she has spent the last few years traveling the world, and most recently has been in South Africa. So she returns home and to a place that she's not super familiar with. Her uncle never really spent a lot of time with her. He sent her away to boarding schools and stuff like that. Anyway, but she does remember it a bit from her childhood, and so she goes there and she has to meet the staff, and it's a brand new life for her. Anyway, so she goes out for a walk in the evening, just to kind of, regroup a little bit, and she ends up close to a quarry, and now it's late and it's raining, and she ends up seeing, because she's trying to climb, I think she's trying to climb the wall or the fence into this quarry, and I can't remember why, but she ends up seeing a man holding a gun to another man, and then she hears a gunshot, and so she's fairly certain that someone is injured, and so she tries to get in, and anyways, she runs away to find help, and so she finally gets back home. She gets lost. She gets back home. She calls the police, and in their little village, their kind of village constable, and he doesn't really believe her, or I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, the police don't come to the quarry until the next day, and there is no body there. And there doesn't appear to have been any kind of an incident. And so the police don't really believe her. And so, of course, she has to investigate herself to prove that something had happened. And yeah, it was good. It was a good introduction to the characters. I really like the character of Ellie. I like the staff at her house. The butler, Clifford, is fantastic. And all of the staff, the housekeeper and the cook, they become her found family. And so I actually did read this for the Golden Girls Readathon. It was for one of the prompts. I think I ended up reading 5 books for that readathon, and so this was the prompt for the prompt of found family. So for the Golden Girls Readathon, I also read The Body in the Library by Agatha Christie. This was for the prompt of a 50-plus character, and so this is a Miss Marple, so that definitely counts. I'm not going to talk about this book though. I'm going to save it for when I do my next Agatha Christie read-through project video. Needless to say, I loved it. It was awesome. And then I also read The Cocoa Conspiracy by Andrea Penrose. This is the second in her series, Lady Ariana Regency Mystery Series. And I read this one for the prompt, I've got my notes here, for the prompt of contains a recipe. So I chose to be part of Team Sophia, and that was one of Team Sophia's prompts, to have a book that contains recipes. And this one actually has recipes from Lady Ariana's chocolate notebooks. at the beginning of every chapter, which was really fun. So this one was for Spanish colonial brownies. We also have Gâteau Rien de Sèvres. So some of them are super fancy. Chocolate pistachio fudge. So yeah, there's recipes at the front of every chapter. Okay, so this is a historical mystery series set in the Regency time period, which I love. I love that time period. And in this one, Lady Ariana Hadley is in a bookshop, and she's looking for a present for her husband for his birthday. And she finds what is the perfect book for him. And it is a gorgeous, gorgeous edition of a book about cocoa, which is something that they both are really interested in. And she is looking at the book and has just decided to buy it when another man approaches her and tries to take the book from her and say that it's not hers and she can't have it. And he actually gets physical with her in the bookstore, and then he pulls a knife, and like it's like, why is someone so interested in this book? Anyways, then the two of them get asked by her husband Saybrook's uncle to go to this house party and kind of pay attention to the guests and what they're saying about certain political aspects. And so they go, and her husband gets shot at. They're out for a hunt, and he gets shot at and wounded. And it's a fairly minor wound, but still. And so then they get asked to go to this big conference in Vienna and try and figure out what's going on. There's some kind of a conspiracy. The book that she finds at the beginning for her husband plays a huge part in the story. I'm not going to tell you because it's I don't want to spoil anything. But this is a really fun series. It looks like a cozy, but it's really not. It's gritty. It's not super violent or anything, but it's definitely grittier than a cozy. I really like the characters. I really like the writing style, and the mystery is really interesting. And there was also this great part. They're packing for their 2 weeks at this country house, and her husband says, "Oh, very well." He began to gather up his papers. "Milford is the sort of fellow who has a wine cellar stocked with superb vintages of port, and a library offering naught but dreadfully dull volumes from the last century. So let us be sure to pack plenty of books. Otherwise we shall be bored to perdition." I like these people. Next up we have Thrush Green by Miss Reed. I read this for the Golden Girls Readathon for the prompt of less than 200 pages for the Team Sophia prompts, and that definitely fit the bill because it is 177 pages. I also read this for Pastoral June, and it's the perfect book for Pastoral June. I mean, the cover is lovely. I believe it was specifically for the prompt of a book with a pastoral image on the cover. I also did this as a buddy read with Rainy from Rainy Day Reads, and it was really fun. I really enjoyed reading this with her, discussing it with her. It's a short little book. It's the first in her Thrush Green series, and really it's just, I think it was really a way to introduce the characters, and I'm really looking forward to reading more in the series and finding out more about the people that we met in this first book. The other thing that I really enjoyed about this book is that it all takes place on one day. So it takes place on May 1st, and everyone in the village is really excited because the fair is coming for the evening. It's there for one evening only on May 1st. And yeah, so it just adds this air of excitement in the village. And I just loved it. It was cozy. It was wonderful. I loved the characters. And you got these great little stories floating through because of all the characters that you met. So I'm really glad that I read it, and I'm really glad that I read it with Rainy, and I can't wait to read more in this series. All right, and then I also read Miss Pym Disposes by Josephine Tay. I read this for a number of things as well. So I read this for the Golden Girls Readathon, and this was to fulfill the prompt of a book written by a woman. That was one of the common challenges. And I also read this for Kate Howe's Summer of Suspense. This was the June pick. I had read this before, but I was totally up for rereading it. And then what I really loved was the discussion. So we had a wonderful Zoom discussion afterwards. There was a number of ladies on that discussion, and it was just really great to talk about it with other people. I really enjoyed that. It really enhances the experience, I think, for me. And because I came out of this book thinking it was okay, but I didn't love it. The last 2 pages honestly saved this book for me, but having the discussion with everyone else actually, I think, has upped it in the ratings for me. So this is the story of Miss Lucy Pym, and she gets invited to be a guest lecturer at a physical training college, and the president or something, headmistress, I don't know what the words are, is someone that she knew from school. They were friends. And so she gets asked to come as a guest lecturer. She is an amateur psychologist, let's say. She read up on psychology because it was just interesting to her, and then she ended up writing a book about it, a popular psychology book with her own thoughts and opinions. And so she was asked to come and be a lecturer at this college, and it was really interesting. Josephine Tay did a great job with the atmosphere in this book and describing what this life was like at the college. You got to meet the lecturers and the staff, and then you also got to meet some of the students. And this is a mystery, but it's definitely a slow burn mystery, and it's not the kind of mystery where you get a body in the first 3 chapters. You have to wait for it, you have to work for it. And I also, and this is why I'm struggling, because I ultimately didn't really like the choices that Miss Pym makes, but I think when an author is able to infuriate you the way Josephine Tay did in this book, that means it's well written, I think. Yeah, I think. And so this book was written originally in 1948, and yeah, it was good. I tabbed it up, all the parts that infuriated me. Okay, so first of all, we don't get the body until page 179. There are only 56 pages left in the book. So it's not an Agatha Christie style murder where you have a body and an investigation. You have the story and the tensions and the suspense. You know that there's kind of something throughout the book, and then the body doesn't happen until really close to the end, actually. So it's a very different style of mystery. And Miss Pym also spends a lot of time trying to figure out what is the right thing to do. And there was some interesting commentary about that. She's having a discussion with this man that she's just met about whether the proper thing is necessarily the right thing to do in a situation. And he says to her, you would always do the right thing and let the consequences, she says to him, you would always do the right thing and let the consequences take care of themselves. That's about it. It is certainly the simplest. In fact, I think it's too simple. Unless you plan to play God, one has to take the simple way, he says. Play God? Unless you are clever enough to see before and after, like the deity, it's best to stick to rules. And then he says, do the obvious right thing, Miss Pym, and let God dispose. So yeah, we had a really interesting discussion actually about the title of this book, Miss Pym Disposes, and what that means. It was really interesting, actually. I really did enjoy that Zoom discussion. Okay. And I think that is all that I read for the Golden Girls Readathon. So I ended up reading, I'm looking at my notebook here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I read 6 books for that. One I must have already talked about because it's not in my pile. I read The Curse of the Pharaohs. I think I talked about that in my last reading roundup. Okay. Moving on, I also read The Lost Man by Jane Harper. This is a standalone of hers. This is set in the outback in Australia. And once again, Jane Harper has managed to write a book where the atmosphere is such a key part of the plot, of the story. She's able to write atmosphere in such a way that you can almost taste it in your mouth. So this is set on one of the, like, what are they called? Cattle stations in the outback. And the thing that I liked the most about this book was learning about what those stations were like and what the weather was like, and how it's such a harsh climate to live, and it's such a lonely climate. So this is the story of three brothers, and at the beginning of the book, the body of one brother, Sam, is found at the stockman's grave. It's in the middle of nowhere, and it's a grave that's been there for years and years and years and years. And his body is found there by a helicopter. They use helicopters to make sure that things are fine in the area, and to take a look at the cattle, because these ranches are so huge. Anyway, so they see his body there, and his body is by this graveyard. And what's bizarre is that his car isn't anywhere near. He has no water. He has no supplies, and they don't understand why he would get himself in that situation, because they know better. And so they do end up finding his car 9 kilometers away, which is really far. And why would he leave his car and not bring any supplies with him? So this is set in December, which is of course the hottest month of the year in Australia. And so they talk about it being 45 degrees, which is really hot. And so they talk about the size of these ranches, which were just huge. Like, they talked about one ranch being the size of Sydney. Like, this is huge. So these three brothers, their ranches are adjoining, but they're 3 hours apart. So it's just a huge, massive landscape. And then with the weather the way that it is, you know, they have to have these vehicles that are older vehicles, because the new computer technology just can't survive in that climate. And they have to have stocked vehicles. So they've got like refrigerators in the back that run on generators or batteries or something, with water stocked in there, and food and all kinds of supplies. And they have radios everywhere to keep in touch with each other. And so just this climate is just unbelievable. Ultimately, though, this wasn't my favorite story, but it was just because it ended up being quite a sad story of what had actually happened to the brother and why and whatever. But my goodness, can Jane Harper ever write a story, and especially the atmosphere? It was just unbelievable. I also read The Windsor Knot by S.J. Bennett. This is a newer book. This was from last year, I think, 2020. And it's this, the main character is Queen Elizabeth II, which I thought was fascinating. No, it was actually this year, 2021. And so this is a story about Queen Elizabeth. And so it's set at Windsor Castle, and she is having a dine and sleep. So they will periodically invite people over to have supper, and then they sleep the night, and then they go back home in the morning. And there are a number of guests, and one of the guests is found dead the next morning. And as they investigate, it turns out that he was murdered. And this is a problem, because this is Windsor Castle while the Queen was in residence. And so MI5 gets involved, Scotland Yard gets involved, and there's this big investigation. But as we discover, the Queen also likes to dip her toes into the investigations. This book was set in 2016, and so it was it opens just before her 90th birthday. And I actually really liked how S.J. Bennett wrote the Queen. The character of the Queen. I did really enjoy that, and it was a fun book to read. It was an interesting mystery. but more so it was just delightful to read about the Queen and how she did kind of investigate without anybody knowing that she was investigating, because that's not proper, but also do all of the other things that she has to do as Queen. And so it was just a really, really fun read. The big book that I read for Pastoral June was Lark Rise to Candleford by Flora Thompson. This is actually a trilogy of books. It is Lark Rise, which was written in 1939, Over to Candleford, which was written in 1941, and then Candleford Green, which was written in 1943. And I read this with a group of people. We chatted about it on Voxer, and that was actually really, really fun to chat with people about their experiences reading this book, and hearing kind of them make connections to their own lives. And so this is basically the record of a specific place at a specific time, and I think that those kind of stories are historically really important to tell. And so this is the story of a hamlet and a village in Oxfordshire in the 1880s and 1890s. And she records what the houses were like in both the hamlet and the village. She talks about the games that children would play, what school was like for children, what church was like, and if people went to church, what the songs they would sing, the stories that they would tell. And it was just wonderful. They talked about the type of work that the men did, the type of work that the women did. It was just wonderful. The first book feels very much like vignettes, where each chapter is almost just like little snippets of something specific about Hamlet life, because the first book, Lark Rise, is all about the Hamlet. And then once we get to Over to Candleford and then Candleford Green, it really does start to stay with Laura, who is the main character, and you get more about her story and what it's like for her when she goes to work there at the post office. And this was just a wonderful, wonderful story. I really did enjoy reading it. And then I also read Agatha Christie's Poirot, the Greatest Detective in the World by Mark Aldridge. This is also a newer book. This came out in 2020. And he basically goes decade by decade, and he put a lot of work into putting this together. And he talks about Poirot in each of these decades. So, hang on a second. Chapter 1, the 20s. And so he starts with The Mysterious Affair at Styles. He talks about each book that Agatha Christie wrote that has Poirot in it, but he also talked about any radio plays or radio dramas, that had Poirot in it, TV adaptations, movie adaptations. And so he starts with 1920s and he moves right up into the 2000s, right up until he was writing this book. And it was great. There was a lot of stuff in here with like letters that Agatha Christie wrote to her publisher or to, say, American publishers. And it was just really interesting. There was a lot of like insider information about Poirot and how the books got published and how the adaptations got made and all of that. It was just really, really interesting. So if you're an Agatha Christie fan, this is a fun book to read to add to your knowledge for sure. Okay, so that's it. That's what I've been reading recently. Have you read any of these books? I would love to talk with you about them in the comment section down below, and I will see you for another video soon.